Welcome back to the Sleepy Mind channel. Tonight we explore bees, following their lives as they move through land, plants, seasons, and time, shaping systems that are often noticed only in passing. If you find these long, calm science documentaries useful, you can like the video and subscribe for more. If you choose to leave a comment about where you are listening from, it is always interesting to see how far these stories travel. Let us begin. Bees exist almost everywhere that flowering plants grow. They live across continents, islands, mountains, coastlines, grasslands, forests, deserts, and cities. In some places they are large and easy to notice. In others they are small, brief, and easily overlooked, passing through the landscape without drawing attention. There are thousands of bee species, and most of them do not resemble the few familiar examples people tend to picture. Many never enter hives. Many never make honey. Some live only a short time as adults, emerging, feeding, mating, and disappearing within a narrow window each year. Others are part of groups that persist across seasons, maintaining nests that are reused and repaired over time. Bee bodies reflect how and where they live. Dense hair traps pollen and insulates against cold. Smooth bodies pass easily into narrow flowers or soil tunnels. Color ranges from pale browns and blacks to bright yellows and deep metallic blues and greens. These colors arise from structure and chemistry rather than decoration, shaped by temperature, visibility, and interaction with plants. Food shapes behavior. Some bees gather nectar and pollen from many kinds of flowers. Others visit only a single plant group, timing their lives to match its flowering period. Some collect oils instead of nectar. Some store food. Others consume what they need each day and leave nothing behind. Movement is constant. Bees travel between flowers, between feeding areas and nesting sites, and across familiar routes they learn and remember. Some remain close to where they emerge. Others range widely, crossing open ground and navigating back with precision that does not rely on landmarks as humans understand them. Life unfolds quickly and quietly. Eggs become larvae, larvae become adults, and adults perform the work that sustains the next generation. In some species, different individuals perform different tasks. In others, each bee completes the entire cycle alone. These differences arise from biology rather than choice. Honey, where it exists, is part of this system. It is concentrated nectar, transformed and stored to support life when flowers are absent. It is one solution among many, used by a small number of species and unnecessary for most. Across all of this variation, bees continue their daily activity with little interruption. They feed, move, build, reproduce, and persist within systems that function whether they are noticed or not. Bees are found across nearly every land environment where flowering plants grow. They live on every continent except Antarctica, occupying regions that range from tropical forests to temperate meadows, from dry deserts to alpine slopes. Their presence follows plants rather than climate alone, appearing wherever flowers provide the resources bees require to survive. In warm regions near the equator, bee activity continues throughout the year. Flowering may shift with rainfall rather than season, and bees adjust their life cycles accordingly. Some species remain active continuously, while others emerge only when specific plants bloom. Diversity is highest in these regions, with many species occupying narrow ecological roles. In temperate zones, bees follow more defined seasonal patterns. Cold winters limit activity, and many bees survive these periods as larvae, pupae, or fertilized females sheltered in soil, wood, or plant material. When temperatures rise and flowers return, adult bees emerge in synchrony with local plant cycles. Deserts support bees despite extreme conditions. Here, life is tightly timed. Some desert bees remain dormant underground for years, emerging only after sufficient rainfall triggers flowering. Their lives may last only weeks, yet during that time they collect food, reproduce, and ensure the next generation is prepared to wait again. Mountain environments host bees adapted to cold temperatures and thin air. These bees often have dense hair that helps retain heat and support flight in cooler conditions. Their activity windows are short, confined to brief summer periods when alpine flowers bloom. Outside these windows, survival depends on sheltered development stages, protected from freezing. Forests provide layered habitats. Bees forage in open clearings, along edges, and high in tree canopies, where flowering trees produce large quantities of nectar and pollen. Others remain closer to the forest floor, visiting understory plants, or nesting in decaying wood and soil rich in organic material. Grasslands and meadows support some of the greatest concentrations of bee activity. Open exposure allows a wide variety of flowering plants to thrive. Many bee species specialize in these environments, forming strong associations with particular plant groups that dominate local landscapes. Coastal regions host bees adapted to sandy soils and salt-tolerant vegetation. These bees often nest underground, using compacted sand to protect developing offspring. Their foraging routes may follow narrow bands of vegetation shaped by wind and tide. Urban areas have become habitats as well. Gardens, parks, roadside verges, and even cracks in pavement provide flowering plants and nesting opportunities. Some bees adapt readily to these fragmented environments, while others remain dependent on continuous natural landscapes. Island ecosystems often host unique bee species found nowhere else. Isolation allows populations to diverge over time, producing bees adapted to limited plant communities and restricted space. These bees may show unusual sizes, colors, or behaviors shaped by local conditions. The global distribution of bees reflects both movement and limitation. Bees do not migrate long distances across continents like some birds or insects. Instead, populations spread gradually as environments allow. Their presence in a region represents long periods of adaptation rather than rapid expansion. Different parts of the world support different balances of bee types. Some regions are dominated by solitary species, where each female builds and provisions her own nest. Other regions support social species that form colonies lasting multiple seasons. These patterns arise from environmental stability, resource availability, and evolutionary history. Despite this variation, the basic requirements remain consistent. Bees require flowering plants, suitable nesting spaces, and conditions that allow development to proceed. Where these elements align, bees establish and persist. Where they do not, bees are absent regardless of climate or geography. Across the world, bees occupy spaces that appear ordinary and overlooked. A patch of bare ground, a hollow stem, a fallen branch, or a flowering shrub may support a complete bee life cycle. These small-scale habitats repeat across landscapes, allowing bees to exist in places that might otherwise seem unsuitable. Seen at this scale, bees are not rare or exceptional. They are widespread and deeply integrated into land-based ecosystems. Their global presence reflects their ability to adapt to specific conditions rather than dominate them. Bees belong to a specific group of insects, distinguished by a combination of traits rather than a single feature. At a basic level, bees are insects with 3 main body sections, 6 legs, and 2 pairs of wings. These traits are shared with many other insects, so what defines a bee lies in finer details of structure and behavior. One defining feature is diet. Bees feed primarily on floral resources. Nectar provides carbohydrates, while pollen supplies protein, fats, vitamins, and minerals. This reliance on flowers sets bees apart from closely related insects, such as wasps, which are often predators or scavengers. The shift toward plant-based feeding shaped the bee body over millions of years. Bee mouthparts are adapted for collecting liquid nectar and handling pollen. The tongue, or proboscis, can vary in length depending on the flowers a species visits. Some bees have short tongues suited to open flowers. Others have long tongues that reach deep into tubular blooms. These differences limit which plants a bee can use and influence where it can live. Hair plays a critical role. Bees are generally covered in branched hairs that trap pollen grains as they move between flowers. These hairs are not evenly distributed. Dense patches appear on the legs or underside of the body, forming structures that help carry pollen back to the nest. In contrast, many wasps have smooth bodies that do not retain pollen easily. The legs of bees show further specialization. Many species possess flattened areas or stiff hairs on the hind legs, used to collect and transport pollen. In honeybees and bumblebees, this structure forms a pollen basket. Other bees carry pollen on the abdomen or across the entire body, depending on species and nesting behavior. Bee wings are designed for agile flight rather than speed alone. Rapid wing beats allow hovering, precise landing, and controlled movement among flowers. Wing muscles generate heat during activity, helping some bees remain active in cooler temperatures. This capacity supports foraging in environments where other insects remain inactive. Vision differs as well. Bees possess compound eyes that detect movement and color patterns. Their visual range includes ultraviolet light, which reveals markings on flowers invisible to humans. These markings guide bees toward nectar and pollen, reinforcing the close relationship between bee perception and plant structure. Smell is equally important. Antennae contain sensory receptors that detect floral scents, pheromones, and chemical signals from other bees. This sense guides foraging, mating, and nest recognition. Chemical cues shape behavior continuously, rather than through conscious decision. Internally, bees share physiological traits linked to their diet and lifestyle. Their digestive systems process liquid nectar efficiently, converting sugars into usable energy. Enzymes break down pollen walls, releasing nutrients essential for growth and reproduction. These processes distinguish bees from insects that rely on animal prey. Reproduction further separates bees from similar insects. Female bees lay eggs that develop into larvae requiring pollen-based food. The need to provision offspring with stored food influences nesting behavior, site selection, and lifespan. Wasps that hunt prey deliver fresh food repeatedly, while bees must gather and store resources in advance. Behavioral traits reinforce these differences. Bees regularly visit flowers, move between plant species, and follow repeated routes. These patterns are consistent even in solitary species. The combination of feeding, movement, and nesting behavior defines bees more clearly than appearance alone. Despite shared traits, bees vary widely in how these features are expressed. Some are large and robust. Others are tiny and delicate. Some form colonies. Others remain solitary. What unites them is not uniformity, but a shared evolutionary path shaped by flowers. This path explains why bees occupy a distinct place among insects. Their bodies, senses, and behaviors reflect long adaptation to a specific way of living. They are not simply insects that happen to visit flowers. They are organisms built around floral life. There are more than 20,000 known species of bees, and scientists continue to identify new ones. These species are grouped into families and genera based on shared traits, but within those groupings, diversity remains high. Bees differ in size from a few millimeters to several centimeters. They vary in color, shape, and behavior in ways that reflect the environments they occupy. Some bees resemble the familiar image of a rounded, striped insect. Others look more like small flies or wasps, slender and dark, moving quickly and quietly. Metallic bees reflect light in shades of green, blue, or copper. These colors arise from microscopic surface structures rather than pigments, bending light in specific ways that may help with temperature regulation or visibility among flowers. Most bee species are solitary. Each female builds her own nest, gathers food, lays eggs, and seals the nest without assistance. These bees do not form colonies, do not produce honey, and do not divide labor. Their lives follow a simple but effective pattern that has persisted for millions of years. Social bees represent a smaller portion of bee diversity. These include honeybees, bumblebees, and a few other groups. Social living involves shared nests, overlapping generations, and cooperation among individuals. Even within social bees, organization varies. Some colonies last many years. Others form annually and dissolve when conditions change. Bee families often reflect preferred nesting styles. Ground nesting bees dig tunnels in soil, sand, or clay. Cavity nesting bees use hollow plant stems, beetle holes in wood, or gaps in rock. Some bees line their nests with leaves or petals. Others use resin, mud, or secreted substances to protect developing young. Diet also shapes diversity. Many bees are generalists, visiting a wide range of flowering plants. Others are specialists, collecting pollen from a single plant species or group. These specialist bees time their emergence precisely to match flowering periods, creating tight links between plant and insect life cycles. Geography further influences variation. Isolated regions produce unique species adapted to local plants and conditions. In some areas, bees have evolved to withstand extreme heat. In others, they tolerate cold, wind, or high elevation. These adaptations influence body size, hair density, and activity patterns. Differences extend to behavior during foraging. Some bees make short trips close to their nests. Others travel long distances across open terrain. Memory, learning ability, and sensory emphasis vary accordingly. Bees that forage widely rely on strong navigation skills. Those that forage locally depend more on scent and immediate cues. Reproductive strategies also vary. Some species produce one generation per year. Others produce multiple generations under favorable conditions. Lifespan differs between solitary and social bees, with solitary adults often living shorter lives, focused entirely on reproduction. Despite this diversity, bees share a common role in ecosystems through their reliance on flowers. Their variation allows them to occupy niches that other insects cannot, collectively supporting a wide range of plant species. Seen together, the many kinds of bees form not a hierarchy, but a network of specialized lives. Each species persists by matching its biology closely to the conditions it encounters. Diversity itself becomes the mechanism that allows bees, as a group, to remain widespread and resilient. Solitary bees represent the most common way of being a bee. In these species, each female operates independently from the moment she emerges. She mates, locates a nesting site, gathers food, lays eggs, and seals the nest without assistance. There is no shared home, no cooperation, and no overlap between generations. This independence shapes every aspect of solitary bee life. Nesting sites are chosen for safety rather than proximity to others. Food is collected in amounts sufficient only for a small number of offspring. Once a nest is sealed, the female does not return. Her role ends there, and the next generation develops alone. Social bees follow a different pattern. In these species, individuals share a nest and divide tasks. Colonies contain overlapping generations, with adults caring for young that are not their own offspring. Cooperation allows colonies to persist beyond the lifespan of any one individual. The degree of social behavior varies. Bumblebee colonies are relatively small and seasonal. A single fertilized female establishes a nest, produces workers, and later produces new queens and males. When conditions decline, the colony ends, and only the new queens survive to begin the cycle again. Honeybee colonies are more persistent. They can survive for many years, maintaining a stable population through winter by relying on stored food. Tasks are distributed among thousands of individuals, and the colony functions as a continuous unit rather than a seasonal one. Between solitary and fully social bees lie species with intermediate behavior. Some share nesting sites without cooperation. Others cooperate briefly during nest construction or defense. These variations suggest that social behavior evolves gradually, shaped by environmental stability and resource availability. Honeybees and bumblebees are among the most familiar bee types, but they represent only a small fraction of bee diversity. Honeybees are characterized by large colonies, wax comb construction, and honey storage. Their ability to store food allows them to remain active across seasons. Bumblebees are larger and more robust, often active in cooler temperatures. Their dense hair helps retain heat, and they can generate warmth through muscle activity. Bumblebee colonies are smaller and shorter lived than honeybee colonies, but they are highly effective pollinators. Many other bees are less noticeable. Leafcutter bees slice pieces of leaves to line their nests. Mason bees use mud to build partitions. Carpenter bees excavate tunnels in wood. These bees rarely draw attention, yet they perform the same essential tasks of feeding, nesting, and reproduction. Familiarity often depends on proximity to humans. Bees that nest near buildings or visit garden flowers are noticed more often than those living in remote habitats. This visibility does not reflect importance, only opportunity for observation. Bee bodies are shaped by their interaction with flowers. Wings provide controlled flight rather than speed alone. Rapid wing movement allows hovering, sudden turns, and precise landings. These movements support feeding from flowers of many shapes and sizes. Legs are adapted for gripping petals, collecting pollen, and landing on uneven surfaces. Many bees have specialized structures for carrying pollen, ranging from dense hair to flattened areas that hold compacted grains. Hair plays multiple roles. It traps pollen, insulates against temperature change, and can influence how easily bees enter certain flowers. Hair density and placement vary by species, reflecting different feeding strategies. Eyes are positioned to detect movement and color patterns rather than fine detail. This supports navigation among flowers and recognition of feeding sites. Combined with scent detection, vision guides bees efficiently through complex environments. Together, these physical traits allow bees to interact closely with plants. Their bodies are not general purpose. They are shaped by repeated contact with flowers, generation after generation, producing forms suited to specific tasks rather than broad versatility. Color in bees serves several practical purposes, and it varies widely across species. The familiar yellow and black pattern seen in many bees increases visibility against green vegetation. This contrast helps bees recognize one another and may also signal presence to other animals. The pattern is not uniform because different environments favor different levels of visibility. Some bees are dark brown or black, absorbing heat more efficiently in cooler climates. Others are pale or sandy colored, blending into dry environments where camouflage reduces risk. Metallic bees display greens, blues, or copper tones created by microscopic surface structures that reflect light. These colors do not fade and can influence temperature regulation and visibility under strong sunlight. Color also relates to behavior. Bees that forage openly may benefit from being easily seen by other bees. Bees that move quickly or forage close to the ground may benefit more from blending in. There is no single color scheme that defines success. Each reflects adaptation to specific conditions rather than preference. Bees experience color differently from humans. Their eyes detect wavelengths that include ultraviolet light. Flowers often display ultraviolet patterns that guide bees toward nectar and pollen. These patterns are invisible to people, but clear to bees, forming visual pathways that make feeding more efficient. Bee vision is sensitive to movement and contrast rather than detail. This allows rapid detection of flowers while in flight. Combined with memory, bees learn the appearance of rewarding plants and return to them repeatedly. This learning improves efficiency over time without requiring complex decision-making. Smell complements vision. Antennae detect floral scents, pheromones, and chemical cues left by other bees. These signals provide information about food availability, nest location, and social status. Chemical communication operates continuously, shaping behavior moment by moment. Food choice varies among bees. Nectar provides energy through sugars. Pollen supplies protein, fats, and nutrients needed for growth. Some bees rely heavily on nectar. Others focus on pollen. A few collect floral oils instead of nectar, using them to feed larvae or line nests. Diet shapes foraging behavior. Generalist bees visit many plant species, adjusting routes as flowers change. Specialist bees focus on a narrow group of plants, emerging only when those plants bloom. This specialization reduces competition and ties bee life cycles closely to plant timing. Food is collected not only for immediate use but for offspring. Solitary bees gather pollen and nectar, form a food mass, lay an egg, and seal the nest. Social bees distribute food among colony members, supporting larvae, workers, and queens collectively. Finding food requires navigation. Bees learn the location of flowers relative to the nest. They remember distances, directions, and landmarks. Repeated routes form as bees travel efficiently between feeding sites and home. Some bees communicate food location to others, Honeybees use movement and scent to convey direction and distance. Other bees rely on individual learning rather than shared information. These differences reflect social structure rather than intelligence. Memory allows bees to adjust to changing conditions. When a flower stops producing nectar, bees reduce visits. When a new source appears, routes change. This flexibility supports survival in environments where resources shift daily. Together, color, vision, diet, and memory form an integrated system. Bees are not simply reacting to flowers. They are engaging with a sensory world shaped by plant signals, environmental conditions, and past experience. When honey is made, the process begins with nectar collected from flowers. Nectar is a watery liquid, rich in sugars, produced by plants to attract visiting insects. Honeybees collect nectar using their tongues and store it temporarily in a specialized internal organ, often called the honey stomach. This organ is separate from the digestive system and functions as a transport chamber rather than a place where energy is used. As nectar is carried back to the nest, enzymes begin to act on it. Complex sugars are broken down into simpler forms. Water content remains high at this stage, and the substance is still nectar rather than honey. Transformation continues only after it is transferred to other bees inside the nest. Within the hive, nectar is passed from bee to bee through repeated exchange. Each transfer adds enzymes and reduces water content slightly. This repeated handling increases surface area and accelerates chemical change. The liquid gradually thickens as sugars become more concentrated. Once placed into honeycomb cells, bees continue the drying process. They move air across the surface by fanning their wings, encouraging evaporation. Over time, water content drops to a level that prevents fermentation. At this point, the substance becomes honey. Honey exists as a stable food source that can be stored for long periods without spoiling. Its low water content and chemical composition inhibit microbial growth. This allows honeybee colonies to survive periods when flowers are absent, such as winter or drought. Only a small number of bee species make honey in this way. Most bees do not store food long term. Solitary bees gather food for individual offspring rather than for a shared future. Honey is one solution to seasonal scarcity, not a universal feature of bee life. Pollination occurs as bees feed. Pollen grains attach to hairs on the bee's body and are transferred between flowers during movement. This transfer allows plants to reproduce by fertilizing ovules that develop into seeds. Bees do not perform this action deliberately. It is a physical result of feeding and movement. Different bees interact with flowers in different ways. Some contact pollen directly, others avoid it. Flower shape, bee size, and behavior influence how much pollen is moved and where it is deposited. This variation supports a wide range of plant reproductive strategies. Pollination benefits plants, but bees gain nutrition rather than reproductive success from the interaction. This alignment of interests developed over long evolutionary time, shaping both flower structure and bee behavior without planning or coordination. Bee life begins as an egg. Female bees lay eggs individually, often placing them alongside a supply of food. After hatching, larvae consume the stored food, growing rapidly. During this stage, movement is limited. Development depends entirely on the quality and quantity of provisions. After larval growth is complete, transformation occurs inside a protective casing. Internal structures reorganize, producing wings, legs, eyes, and adult organs. This stage lasts days or weeks, depending on species and environmental conditions. Adult bees emerge fully formed and ready to function. In solitary species, adults focus immediately on feeding and reproduction. In social species, adults take on tasks within the group before reproducing or may never reproduce at all. Lifespan varies widely. Some adult bees live only a few weeks. Others live months or longer. Longevity depends on role, environment, and social structure rather than size alone. Across all species, the cycle continues quietly. Eggs become larvae. Larvae become adults. Adults perform the work that sustains the next generation. This cycle repeats without interruption wherever conditions allow. In social bee species, individuals develop into different roles that shape how the group functions. Queens are reproductive females capable of laying eggs. Workers are females that do not reproduce and instead perform tasks that support the group. Males exist primarily to mate and do not participate in nest maintenance or food collection. These roles are not chosen. They arise from development and biology. In honeybees and bumblebees, workers perform different tasks at different stages of life. Younger workers tend to remain inside the nest, feeding larvae, cleaning cells, and maintaining structure. As they age, they transition to foraging and defense outside the nest. Queens differ physically from workers. They are larger, with reproductive organs adapted for sustained egg-laying. Their role is not leadership in the human sense. They do not direct others. Their presence influences colony behavior through chemical signals rather than commands. Males differ again. They lack structures for pollen collection and do not participate in nest tasks. Their life is brief and focused on reproduction. After mating, they die or are excluded from the nest when resources decline. A queen is formed through nutrition during development. In species where queens and workers are genetically similar, larvae destined to become queens receive different food. In honeybees, this food is a substance known as royal jelly, produced by workers. Continuous access to this food triggers developmental pathways that produce a queen rather than a worker. There is no selection process or decision involved. Any larva receiving the appropriate nutrition during a critical window develops into a queen. Timing and availability determine outcome rather than status or preference. Inside a hive or nest, work is constant and varied. Bees build and repair structures, regulate temperature, process food, and care for developing young. Temperature control is particularly important. Bees cluster to generate heat or fan wings to cool the nest, maintaining conditions suitable for development. Communication within social nests relies on chemical cues, movement, and contact. Bees detect changes in colony needs through scent and behavior rather than instruction. Tasks are taken up as required, emerging from individual responses rather than coordination by a central authority. Most bees do not live this way. Solitary bees complete the entire life cycle alone. A solitary female builds a nest, gathers food, lays eggs, and seals the nest without help. There are no workers and no shared care. Solitary nests vary widely. Some are tunnels in soil, others are cavities in wood or hollow plant stems. Some bees line their nests with leaves or petals. Others use mud or resin. These structures protect developing offspring from weather and predators. After sealing the nest, the female does not return. Offspring develop independently, emerging when conditions allow. There is no further interaction between generations. This strategy reduces disease spread and competition, allowing many solitary species to coexist in the same area. Despite the lack of cooperation, solitary bees are highly effective. Their independence allows rapid reproduction and flexible use of available nesting sites. This lifestyle represents the most common and enduring way of being a bee. Choosing a place to live begins with the needs of the species rather than chance. Some bees search for bare ground with the right balance of firmness and drainage. Others look for hollow stems, abandoned insect tunnels in wood, cracks in stone, or cavities in trees. The choice reflects protection from moisture, temperature extremes, and disturbance during development. Ground nesting bees test soil by landing, digging briefly, and moving on if conditions are unsuitable. Soil that collapses easily or holds too much water is avoided. Sites with stable structure allow tunnels to remain intact long enough for larvae to develop. Orientation matters as well. Slopes and sun exposure influence temperature inside the nest. Cavity nesting bees rely on existing spaces rather than excavation. They assess size, depth, and cleanliness. Cavities that are too shallow expose offspring to predators. Cavities that are too deep may be difficult to provision efficiently. Bees return repeatedly to suitable sites, sometimes using the same area year after year. Materials used in construction vary by species. Some bees secrete wax to build internal structures. Others gather mud to create partitions between brood cells. Leafcutter bees remove precise pieces of leaves or petals, carrying them back to line nests. Resin bees collect sticky plant resins that harden into protective barriers. These materials serve multiple purposes. They stabilize structure, regulate moisture, deter parasites, and separate developing offspring. Construction is not decorative. Each choice reflects function shaped by long adaptation. Movement across landscapes links feeding and nesting. Bees travel between flowers and home along repeated routes. Distance varies widely. Some species remain close to their nests. Others travel kilometers when resources are sparse. Energy cost shapes these decisions, favoring efficiency over exploration. Navigation relies on a combination of visual cues, light patterns, and memory. Bees learn the position of the sun and adjust for its movement. They recognize landmarks, such as tree lines, edges, and contrasts in terrain. These abilities allow accurate return even after complex foraging trips. Daily activity follows environmental conditions. Bees are most active when temperatures support flight and flowers are open. Early morning and late afternoon activity differs by species. Some bees specialize in cooler periods. Others avoid midday heat. Seasonal rhythms shape life cycles. In regions with cold winters, bees time emergence to spring flowering. In warmer regions, activity may follow rainfall patterns. Development stages pause or accelerate depending on temperature and food availability. Across these rhythms, bees remain closely tied to plants. Flowering times influence emergence. Nesting follows feeding success. Movement patterns reflect resource distribution. The system remains active through alignment rather than control. Bees live alongside many other organisms, and their lives are shaped by these constant interactions. Plants provide food and structure, but other insects share the same spaces. Some compete for floral resources. Others arrive earlier or later in the day, reducing direct overlap. These timing differences allow many species to use the same landscape without excluding one another. Parasites and predators are part of this environment as well. Birds, spiders, and other insects feed on bees opportunistically. Parasites target nests, larvae, or stored food. Bees respond through nesting choices, materials that deter intrusion, and timing that reduces exposure. These interactions influence behavior without defining it. Microorganisms also play a role. Bacteria and fungi live within nests and on bee bodies. Some assist with food preservation or digestion, others pose risks. Bees manage these relationships indirectly through materials they use and conditions they maintain rather than through direct control. Across all of this diversity, no bee occupies a higher or lower position. Differences among bees reflect adaptation rather than ranking. Large bees are not more important than small ones. Social bees are not more advanced than solitary ones. Each fits a particular set of conditions. Some bees are specialized and rare, others are widespread and numerous. This variation allows the group as a whole to persist across changing environments. When conditions shift, some species decline while others remain well suited. Diversity itself supports continuity. In the present world, bees continue their daily activities in familiar ways. They emerge, feed, navigate, build, and reproduce. These actions occur in agricultural fields, wild landscapes, gardens, and city spaces. The details vary, but the underlying patterns remain consistent. Modern landscapes introduce new arrangements of plants and nesting spaces. Bees respond by using what is available. Flowering crops provide seasonal abundance. Gardens offer diverse resources. Unmanaged spaces supply nesting opportunities. Bees adjust routes and timing rather than abandoning their habits. Across all of this, the work bees do remains practical and immediate. They gather food to sustain themselves and their offspring. They move pollen as a consequence of feeding. They build structures that protect developing young. These actions repeat across generations without accumulation of intention. As this activity continues, attention remains with the process rather than outcome. Bees do not complete a task and move on to something else. Their lives are a sequence of repeated actions shaped by environment, body, and time. Within the process of making honey, time becomes as important as chemistry. Nectar collected during a single foraging trip contributes only a small part to the final stored food. The transformation depends on repetition. Thousands of visits, thousands of exchanges between bees, and sustained airflow inside the nest gradually change a dilute liquid into a stable substance. The structure of the hive supports this work. Hexagonal cells provide a large surface area relative to volume, allowing moisture to escape efficiently. Bees add nectar in thin layers rather than filling cells at once. This layering accelerates evaporation and reduces the risk of fermentation before the process is complete. Temperature inside the hive is carefully maintained during this period. Bees cluster or fan their wings to keep conditions stable. Consistency matters more than speed. Once honey is sealed within cells, it remains largely unchanged. It is not consumed immediately unless needed. Instead, it forms a reserve that supports the colony when flowers are absent. Winter survival in honeybees depends on this stored energy, accessed gradually over long periods. For bees that do not make honey, food storage still plays a role, but on a different scale. Solitary bees provision each offspring with a fixed amount of food. The quantity must be sufficient to support development through larval and pupal stages. Too little results in failure. Too much wastes energy. Precision matters. This precision extends to the life cycle itself. Development timing is adjusted to environmental conditions. In colder climates, development may pause for months. In warmer climates, it proceeds steadily. Some species complete development quickly, producing multiple generations in a year. Others produce a single generation, timed carefully to flowering periods. These differences influence population dynamics. Bees with short life cycles respond rapidly to favorable conditions. Bees with longer cycles rely on stability. Neither approach is superior. Each reflects adaptation to predictable or unpredictable environments. Nest construction also shows this variation. In some species, nests are simple and temporary. In others, they are complex and reused across seasons. Materials used influence durability, insulation, and resistance to parasites. Bees select materials that balance availability with protection. Mud hardens as it dries, forming sturdy partitions. Leaves provide flexibility and moisture control. Resin offers antimicrobial properties. Wax allows precise shaping, but requires energy to produce. Each choice reflects trade-offs shaped by environment rather than preference. Movement across landscapes ties these elements together. Foraging routes connect food sources to nests. The distance traveled affects how much energy remains available for reproduction and maintenance. Bees adjust routes based on reward, abandoning depleted flowers and adopting new ones as availability changes. Navigation improves with experience. Young bees make short flights near the nest, gradually expanding range. Visual memory strengthens with repetition. Routes stabilize, reducing travel time and energy cost. This learning occurs without instruction, emerging from repeated interaction with the environment. Daily rhythms overlay these patterns. Morning activity often focuses on flowers that open early. Midday heat limits activity for some species while favoring others. Evening activity declines as light fades and temperatures drop. These rhythms vary by species and location. Seasonal rhythms extend this timing further. Emergence aligns with flowering. Nesting follows feeding success. Decline occurs when resources diminish. These cycles repeat with variation rather than exact replication. Across all of this, bees remain focused on immediate tasks. There is no accumulation of strategy. Each action responds to current conditions. Continuity emerges from repetition rather than planning. The variety of bee lives reflects this principle. Different species solve the same problems in different ways. Feeding, nesting, reproduction, and survival are achieved through multiple pathways. Together, these pathways allow bees as a group to occupy an enormous range of environments. Development in bees unfolds through stages that are fixed in order but flexible in timing. After an egg is laid, it hatches into a larva that remains within the nest. At this stage, movement is minimal. Growth depends entirely on the food provided. In solitary bees, this food must last for the entire developmental period. In social species, larvae are fed repeatedly, allowing adjustment if conditions change. Larval growth is rapid. Body mass increases quickly as nutrients are converted into tissue. Temperature influences the speed of this process. Warmer conditions accelerate development. Cooler conditions slow it. Within limits, bees tolerate variation by adjusting timing rather than altering structure. When larval growth ends, transformation begins. Internal tissues reorganize into adult form. Wings, legs, eyes, and sensory organs develop inside a protective casing. During this period, external activity stops. The bee is vulnerable, but insulated from the environment by nest structure and materials chosen earlier. The duration of this stage varies widely. Some species complete transformation in days. Others take weeks or months. In regions with cold winters, development may pause entirely, resuming when temperatures rise. This pause allows bees to survive unfavorable seasons without expending energy. Adult emergence marks a shift from growth to function. Newly emerged bees may be pale and soft, darkening and hardening over time. In social species, these young adults begin with tasks inside the nest, gradually taking on more demanding roles. In solitary species, adults must feed and reproduce immediately. Lifespan is shaped by role and environment. Foraging is energetically costly and increases exposure to predators and weather. Bees that forage extensively tend to live shorter lives. Bees that remain within nests live longer. Queens live longest, protected by the group and focused on reproduction rather than labor. Reproduction itself is regulated by conditions rather than intention. In many species, sex is determined by fertilization. Fertilized eggs become females. Unfertilized eggs become males. This system allows flexible adjustment of sex ratios based on resource availability. In social species, this flexibility supports colony function. More workers are produced when labor is needed. Males are produced when mating opportunities arise. Queens are produced only under specific conditions tied to food availability and colony state. These processes occur without oversight. No individual directs development. Outcomes emerge from interactions between nutrition, temperature, timing, and biology. Stability arises through consistency rather than control. Across generations, these patterns repeat with variation. Environmental conditions differ from year to year. Flowering times shift, weather changes. Bees adjust by altering timing and investment rather than redesigning their life cycles. This responsiveness supports persistence. Species do not require exact conditions. They require conditions within a tolerable range. Diversity among bees increases the likelihood that some species thrive under any given set of circumstances. In everyday activity, these life cycles overlap. At any moment, eggs develop, larvae feed, adults forage, and nests are built or sealed. There is no single starting point. Activity continues across stages simultaneously. Seen together, bee life is not a sequence but a flow. Individual lives are brief. The pattern persists. Within a social nest, daily activity shifts gradually rather than abruptly. Tasks are not assigned. They are taken up as needed. A bee responding to a chemical cue or a physical condition begins work without instruction, and when that need diminishes, attention moves elsewhere. Inside a hive, newly emerged workers spend their earliest days close to the brood. They clean cells, warm developing larvae, and distribute food. These tasks require sensitivity rather than strength. Temperature, humidity, and food consistency must remain within narrow ranges for development to continue successfully. As workers age, their bodies change. Glands involved in food production become less active. Muscles strengthen. Sensory responsiveness increases. This shift aligns with a gradual movement outward from the center of the nest toward the entrance and beyond. Later in life, workers take on foraging and defense. These roles expose them to greater risk. Flight requires high energy output. Weather conditions, predators, and exhaustion limit lifespan. The progression from internal to external tasks spreads risk across the colony rather than concentrating it in any one group. Bumblebee colonies follow similar patterns, but at a smaller scale. Fewer individuals perform multiple tasks. Workers may forage and care for brood within the same day. This flexibility reflects shorter colony lifespans and changing conditions across the season. Solitary bees experience a different daily rhythm. Each female performs all tasks herself. She locates a nest site, prepares it, gathers food, lays eggs, and seals chambers. Time management becomes critical. Delays reduce reproductive success. Efficiency determines how many offspring can be produced within a short adult life. Foraging in solitary bees often follows a tight pattern. Trips are repeated between specific plants and the nest. Food is collected in precise quantities. Once a chamber is sealed, it is not reopened. Errors cannot be corrected later. Nest completion marks the end of active care. After sealing the final chamber, the female does not return. Her investment is complete. Offspring develop without further interaction, protected only by nest placement and materials. Despite this difference, the underlying actions remain similar. Feeding, movement, construction, and timing shape outcomes. Social and solitary bees solve the same problems using different arrangements. Across both systems, sensory input guides behavior. Bees respond continuously to temperature, light, scent, and contact. No action occurs in isolation. Each response alters the environment slightly, influencing what happens next. Daily rhythms are shaped by external conditions. Cool mornings favor some species. Warm afternoons favor others. Cloud cover, wind, and humidity alter flight efficiency. Bees adjust activity windows rather than forcing behavior under unsuitable conditions. When flowers close or nectar declines, bees reduce visits. When new blooms open, roots shift. Memory allows rapid adjustment without exploration from scratch. Learning accumulates through repetition. Over days and weeks, these patterns stabilize. Roots become familiar. Nest conditions remain within workable limits. Development proceeds. Then conditions shift again, and the pattern adjusts. Nothing in this process depends on foresight. Continuity emerges from immediate response repeated over time. Across longer stretches of time, stability within bee systems depends on adjustment rather than consistency. Conditions rarely remain the same from one week to the next. Flower availability shifts. Weather patterns change. Nest environments warm and cool. Bees respond by altering behavior incrementally rather than maintaining fixed routines. In social colonies, this adjustment becomes visible through changes in activity level. During periods of abundant flowering, foraging increases. More workers leave the nest, returning frequently with food. Brood production accelerates. The interior of the nest becomes busier, warmer, and more densely occupied. When resources decline, activity slows. Fewer foragers leave at once. Brood production decreases. Energy is conserved. These changes do not require instruction. Chemical cues associated with food availability and brood presence influence behavior automatically. Colony structure shifts subtly during these periods. Areas of the nest that once held developing larvae may remain empty. Storage cells may be used more frequently. Temperature regulation becomes more important as population density changes. Bumblebee colonies experience these fluctuations more sharply due to their smaller size and shorter lifespan. Early in the season, growth is rapid. Later, activity contracts as resources shift and reproduction concludes. The entire cycle unfolds within a limited time frame, shaped closely by local conditions. Solitary bees experience seasonal change differently. Their entire adult life may occur within a narrow window when conditions align. Outside that window, activity ceases completely. Development continues unseen, protected within sealed nests. These differences highlight how bees integrate time into their lives. Some operate across long spans with gradual adjustment. Others compress activity into brief periods of intense work. Both approaches rely on accurate timing rather than endurance. Disruption does not halt these systems, but alters their configuration. A sudden change in weather may reduce foraging for days. Bees remain within nests, conserving energy. When conditions improve, activity resumes without recovery processes or reorganization. Loss of individuals occurs continuously. Foragers do not always return. Predation, weather, and exhaustion reduce numbers gradually rather than suddenly. Colonies absorb these losses by redistributing tasks among remaining members. In solitary species, loss affects only individual reproductive output. A failed nest does not impact others nearby. This separation limits risk spread, allowing populations to persist even when individual success varies widely. Across landscapes, these dynamics play out repeatedly. Some years support high reproductive success, others do not. Bee populations fluctuate without collapsing because variation is expected rather than exceptional. Daily life within these systems remains focused on immediate conditions. Bees do not store information about past seasons. They respond to current signals. Continuity emerges from repeated response rather than memory of outcomes. Movement remains central. Foraging routes adjust as flowers appear and disappear. Nest sites remain fixed, anchoring activity to a location while allowing flexibility outward. This balance allows bees to exploit resources without relocating entirely. As these patterns repeat, the presence of bees remains steady even when individual lives are brief. Activity may rise and fall, but the system continues wherever conditions remain within tolerable limits. As landscapes change gradually around them, bees continue to operate within familiar patterns. Fields shift from flowering to bare soil and back again. Gardens change with planting choices and seasons. Wild areas grow, burn, recover, and mature. Bees respond to these changes without altering the basic structure of their lives. In areas where flowering plants appear in succession rather than all at once, bees adjust foraging routes daily. Early blooms draw attention first. As those flowers fade, attention shifts elsewhere. Memory allows bees to reduce time spent searching, returning to locations that have provided reliable food before. Nesting sites anchor this movement. Even as foraging routes expand or contract, the nest remains the center of activity. Bees return repeatedly, carrying food, building materials, and information encoded through scent and behavior rather than language. In social nests, the balance between food intake and energy use is monitored indirectly. When food stores increase, brood production rises. When stores decline, development slows. These shifts occur without oversight, emerging from local cues within the nest environment. Temperature regulation becomes increasingly important as colonies grow. Bees cluster tightly to conserve heat or spread out to dissipate it. Wing fanning increases airflow. These actions stabilize internal conditions despite external variation. Solitary bees rely more heavily on nest placement for temperature control. Depth underground, orientation towards sunlight, and insulating materials determine whether developing offspring experience stable conditions. Once sealed, these nests remain untouched, relying entirely on earlier decisions. Across both systems, bees remain sensitive to small changes. A slight shift in temperature alters activity timing. A change in wind affects flight efficiency. Variations in humidity influence nectar concentration. Behavior adjusts continuously rather than episodically. Learning accumulates within limits. Bees remember profitable flowers and safe routes. They do not plan future seasons. Each day begins with conditions as they are. Continuity emerges through repetition rather than anticipation. Interactions with other bees shape activity density. When many individuals visit the same flowers, competition increases. Some bees shift timing to earlier or later in the day. Others move to less crowded areas. These adjustments reduce conflict without requiring dominance or exclusion. In mixed environments, multiple bee species operate simultaneously. Differences in size, tongue length, activity timing, and diet allow coexistence. One species may focus on early morning flowers. Another may appear later. One may use deep blossoms. Another may favor open ones. This partitioning reduces direct competition and allows many species to share the same space. Diversity is maintained through difference rather than separation. As days pass, nests fill, seal, or empty. Brood develops unseen. Adults age and disappear. New adults emerge. The surface appearance of activity changes constantly, while the underlying processes remain consistent. There is no moment when this system pauses. Even when flowers are scarce or weather is unfavorable, development continues within protected spaces. Time passes through nests as much as across landscapes. Seen across weeks and months, bee life forms a continuous thread. Individual actions are brief. The pattern persists. Across broader areas, the presence of bees is shaped by how space is used, rather than by clear boundaries. Fields, hedgerows, roadsides, gardens, and unmanaged patches form a connected mosaic, rather than separate zones. Bees move freely across these areas, following resources, rather than ownership or designation. In landscapes where flowering plants appear in waves, bees track these changes closely. Early season flowers draw initial activity. As those fade, attention shifts to later blooming plants. This sequence supports continuous feeding, even when individual plant species are available only briefly. Some bees remain faithful to a narrow range of plants. Others shift frequently. These differences influence how movement spreads across space. Specialist bees create tight links between specific plants and nesting sites. Generalists form wider networks, connecting distant patches of flowers. Nesting opportunities within these landscapes vary. Bare ground appears after disturbance. Hollow stems remain after plants die back. Old wood decays slowly, creating cavities. Bees take advantage of these opportunities as they arise, filling gaps without altering the landscape itself. The timing of nesting is closely tied to feeding success. Bees do not begin nest construction without reliable access to food. For solitary species, each nesting decision represents a commitment of time and energy. For social species, expansion depends on sustained intake rather than short bursts. Within nests, development continues largely unaffected by surface activity. Larvae feed, grow, and transform regardless of weather outside. This separation allows bees to persist through brief periods of poor conditions without altering life cycles. Over time, these hidden processes accumulate. Nests fill, cells are sealed, new adults emerge. The outward appearance of activity may increase or decrease, but the internal rhythm continues. Across seasons, the pattern repeats with variation. Some years bring abundant flowering, others do not. Bee populations respond through changes in reproductive output rather than migration or retreat. Numbers rise and fall, reflecting conditions rather than long-term decline or growth. Memory plays a limited but important role in this process. Individual bees remember routes and feeding sites. Colonies retain no memory beyond the presence of stored food and chemical signals. Each generation begins without knowledge of past seasons. This lack of stored history does not reduce effectiveness. Instead, it allows bees to respond directly to current conditions without bias. Behavior remains flexible, shaped by immediate cues rather than expectation. Interactions with other organisms continue alongside this activity. Insects compete for nectar. Birds feed opportunistically. Microorganisms influence food storage and nest conditions. Bees respond through timing, material choice, and movement rather than confrontation. Through all of this, bees maintain a steady rhythm of activity. Feeding leads to nesting. Nesting leads to development. Development leads to emergence. Emergence leads back to feeding. The cycle does not require reinforcement. It persists through repetition. At no point does the system resolve into a final state. It continues as long as flowers bloom and nesting space exists. Activity shifts location and intensity, but the underlying process remains the same. Across regions with different climates, bees adjust the same basic actions to local conditions. In warmer areas, daily activity may begin earlier and continue longer. In cooler regions, activity concentrates around the warmest part of the day. These shifts do not change what bees do. They change when it can be done efficiently. Wind alters flight behavior. Strong winds reduce precision and increase energy cost. Bees respond by lowering flight height, using shelter provided by vegetation, or delaying foraging until conditions improve. Short flights replace long ones. Routes tighten rather than expand. Rain limits flight directly, but its effects persist after it ends. Flowers hold more diluted nectar. Pollen becomes heavier. Bees adjust collection patterns, visiting different plants or reducing trips until rewards increase again. These responses emerge from immediate feedback rather than planning. Temperature influences not only flight, but internal processes. Metabolic rate increases with warmth. Digestion proceeds more quickly. Development accelerates within nests. When temperatures drop, these processes slow. Bees tolerate a range of conditions by shifting pace rather than altering form. Across days and weeks, these adjustments accumulate. Foraging success one day influences nesting decisions the next. Food availability alters brood development. Storage levels influence how much energy is invested in growth. The system integrates short-term variation into longer patterns without storing memory. In mixed landscapes, bees encounter both familiar and unfamiliar spaces. New plantings appear, old stands disappear. Bees test these changes through exploration. Brief visits determine whether a location becomes part of a regular route. Unreliable sources are abandoned quickly. This exploration carries risk. Energy spent searching is energy not spent feeding or nesting. Bees limit exploration to moments when current routes decline. Once a reliable network is established, activity focuses on known resources. Within colonies, information about food availability spreads through contact and scent rather than instruction. Increased movement near the entrance indicates foraging success. Reduced activity signals scarcity. Individuals respond locally, producing coordinated change without direction. Solitary bees rely more heavily on individual assessment. Each decision affects only one nest. This independence allows rapid adjustment at the population level. Some individuals succeed, others do not. Overall presence remains steady as long as conditions support some portion of the population. Over longer spans, these processes shape where bees are seen regularly. Areas with consistent flowering and nesting opportunities become centers of activity. Less reliable areas are visited intermittently. These patterns remain flexible, shifting with environmental change. Nothing in this behavior suggests optimization toward a goal. Bees do not seek balance or efficiency in an abstract sense. They respond to immediate conditions with actions shaped by evolution rather than intention. The result is a system that continues without accumulation of strategy. Each day begins without reference to previous outcomes, beyond what is encoded in the environment itself. Flowers present or absent, nest full or empty, temperature suitable or not. Through repetition, these simple responses produce persistence. Bees remain present across varied conditions because their behavior is tied closely to what is available rather than what is expected. Across longer spans, the everyday presence of bees becomes less about individual actions and more about pattern. Activity does not follow a straight line. It expands, contracts, shifts, and reappears, guided by conditions that change gradually rather than suddenly. In areas with consistent flowering across the season, bee activity remains evenly distributed. Foraging routes stabilize. Nesting sites are reused or replaced nearby. Development proceeds with fewer interruptions. These environments support steady reproduction rather than brief peaks. In areas where flowering is brief or irregular, activity concentrates tightly. Bees emerge, forage intensively, and complete nesting within a short window. Outside that window, activity disappears from view, continuing only within sealed nests. Presence becomes seasonal rather than continuous. These differences shape how bees are noticed. Some are seen daily across months. Others appear briefly and vanish. The absence of activity does not indicate absence of bees, only that visible stages are not currently active. Within nests, time passes differently. Development unfolds without regard to surface activity. Temperature and moisture influence speed, but progression continues as long as conditions remain within tolerance. This separation allows bees to persist through short-term scarcity without altering life cycles. The materials used in nests contribute to this buffering. Mud partitions retain moisture. Leaf linings regulate humidity. Resin resists microbial growth. Wax seals food stores. Each material extends the range of conditions that developing bees can survive. Across species, these strategies vary in detail, but not in purpose. Protection, stability, and timing remain central. Differences reflect available materials and environmental pressure rather than complexity. As landscapes change year by year, bees adjust distribution rather than behavior. Populations increase where conditions support reproduction. They thin where conditions do not. Movement occurs over short distances rather than large migrations. Presence shifts quietly. In social species, colonies persist across these changes by altering internal balance. Brood production increases or decreases. Foraging effort adjusts. Storage is used or conserved. These changes maintain continuity without expansion beyond available resources. In solitary species, persistence relies on numbers rather than coordination. Many nests are built. Some succeed, some fail. Population-level presence emerges from variation rather than control. Throughout these processes, bees remain focused on immediate conditions. There is no anticipation of future scarcity beyond stored food or sealed nests. Survival depends on accurate response to the present rather than prediction. Over time, this approach proves resilient. Bees occupy environments that fluctuate widely. They persist through unpredictability by remaining responsive rather than fixed. Seen across seasons and years, bee life forms a repeating pattern without exact repetition. Each cycle differs slightly. Timing shifts. Abundance varies. The underlying structure remains. Across all of these environments, what allows bees to remain present is not strength or dominance, but fit. Their bodies, timing, and behavior match the conditions they encounter closely enough to function without excess. Energy is gathered, transformed, and used with little waste. Movement is purposeful without being planned. In places where flowers are abundant but scattered, bees increase travel distance. Where flowers are dense, travel shortens. These adjustments are immediate. Flight paths lengthen or compress based on reward rather than habit. The nest remains fixed, but the landscape around it is sampled continuously. The cost of flight shapes these decisions. Flight requires constant energy input. Nectar gathered must exceed the energy spent reaching it. Bees abandon routes that fall below this threshold quickly. This constraint prevents overexploitation of poor resources and encourages continual reassessment of the environment. Within colonies, this reassessment becomes collective without becoming coordinated. Increased return of food alters behavior near the nest entrance. More movement indicates abundance. Reduced movement indicates scarcity. Individual bees respond locally, but the result is a colony-wide shift in activity. In solitary species, this assessment remains individual. Each bee determines whether continued effort is worthwhile. Some individuals succeed repeatedly, others fail early. The population persists through distribution of effort, rather than optimization of outcome. Nesting decisions reflect similar limits. A nest site must allow enough protection to justify investment. If disturbance is frequent, bees abandon the area. If conditions remain stable, reuse occurs. These decisions emerge from repeated interaction, rather than single evaluation. Over time, areas that consistently meet these thresholds become centers of bee activity. Areas that do not are visited intermittently or not at all. These patterns shift with vegetation, climate, and land use, but the criteria remain the same. At no point do bees attempt to modify the environment beyond immediate needs. They do not reshape landscapes. They occupy what exists. Their influence remains indirect, expressed through movement and contact rather than construction at scale. The absence of control allows flexibility. Bees do not depend on a specific configuration persisting. When conditions change, routes change. When plants shift, associations shift. When nesting materials disappear, alternatives are used if available. This flexibility extends across generations. Offspring do not inherit roots or preferences directly. they encounter conditions anew. Successful behavior emerges through interaction rather than instruction. Across regions, this produces variation without fragmentation. Bee species differ, but their lives follow similar principles. Feeding, nesting, reproduction, and timing remain central. Differences arise in how these are accomplished rather than why. The continuity of bee presence depends on this simplicity. Actions remain close to conditions. There is no accumulation of strategy. Each generation begins with the same requirements and responds to what is present. As this activity continues day after day, the presence of bees becomes part of the background of living systems. Movement between flowers, brief visits, repeated paths, and sealed nests form a pattern that does not draw attention unless it stops. Even then, absence is often temporary. Activity shifts location, depth, or timing. The system remains active beyond immediate view. Across all of these movements and adjustments, bees remain closely tied to the physical limits of their bodies. Flight is powerful, but costly. Muscles generate heat and require constant fuel. When conditions push beyond what flight can sustain, activity slows or stops. Bees do not push past these limits. They wait until conditions allow effort to be effective again. This waiting is not inactivity. Within nests, processes continue. Larvae feed. Development progresses. Food stores are conserved or redistributed. Time passes through these protected spaces, even when surface movement pauses. In social nests, this internal continuity supports persistence through poor conditions. Colonies endure short periods of scarcity by relying on stored food and reduced activity. When conditions improve, outward movement resumes without delay. There is no recovery phase beyond the shift in behavior itself. In solitary nests, continuity depends on construction rather than storage. Protection built into the nest must last through the entire developmental period. Depth, materials, and sealing determine whether offspring survive until emergence. Once sealed, the outcome is set. These different approaches produce similar results. Life continues through unfavorable periods without requiring active response at every moment. The system absorbs variation rather than resisting it. Across days, weeks, and seasons, these patterns accumulate into presence. Bees remain part of landscapes not because they dominate them, but because their lives align closely with what landscapes provide. They use what exists. They avoid what does not support them. In this way, bees occupy spaces that appear marginal or transient. A brief flush of flowers along a roadside, a patch of bare soil after disturbance, a garden that blooms for only part of the year. These spaces support activity precisely because bees require no permanence beyond the duration of their tasks. Movement between these spaces creates a loose network rather than a fixed territory. Bees do not defend areas. They use them while conditions allow and move on when they do not. This fluidity reduces conflict and allows many individuals and species to share the same ground. Over time, the repetition of these actions produces stability without rigidity. Presence remains even as exact locations change. Activity persists even as individual lives end. The simplicity of the system is what allows it to scale. Small actions repeated countless times across landscapes produce continuity without central control. Feeding, nesting, development, and emergence continue wherever conditions remain within tolerable bounds. This persistence does not rely on memory of past success. Each moment is evaluated on its own terms. Flowers present or absent, nest intact or disturbed, temperature suitable or not. Behavior follows directly. As a result, bees remain embedded in the everyday functioning of land-based ecosystems. Their movement links plants across space. Their nesting integrates soil, stems, and wood into life cycles. Their development continues unseen beneath the surface. Nothing here resolves or concludes. Activity remains open-ended, shaped by current conditions rather than directed toward an outcome. Across landscapes shaped by human use and natural change, bees continue to fit their lives into what is available rather than attempting to impose structure. Fields are planted and harvested. Gardens are altered. Wild spaces shift slowly or abruptly. Bees respond by sampling, testing, and settling into patterns that work for the moment. When new flowering plants appear, bees investigate quickly. A brief visit determines whether a plant offers sufficient reward. If it does, return visits follow. If it does not, attention moves elsewhere. This testing happens continuously, allowing bees to track change without storing long-term plans. Some plants produce nectar reliably for days. Others offer brief pulses. Bees learn these rhythms through repeated contact. Foraging routes adjust to include dependable sources and exclude those that fade. This learning remains local and temporary, replaced as conditions change. In areas where flowers are arranged in patches rather than spread evenly, bees move between clusters, linking separate spaces through repeated flight. These movements do not create territory. They create pathways that exist only while resources remain available. Nests remain fixed while routes change. This separation allows stability without rigidity. The home stays in place. The world beyond it is sampled continuously. When routes no longer support return, new ones form. Over time, this produces a shifting pattern of presence. Activity concentrates where conditions align and thins where they do not. These concentrations are not permanent. They follow flowering, weather, and disturbance rather than location. In social species, these shifts influence colony structure. Increased food intake supports brood growth. Reduced intake slows it. Storage buffers short-term change, but does not prevent adjustment. Colonies remain sized to current conditions rather than past success. In solitary species, adjustment occurs through output rather than structure. Fewer nests are completed when conditions decline. More are completed when conditions improve. Population size reflects accumulated success rather than deliberate control. Across seasons, these adjustments smooth extremes. Bees do not attempt to compensate for poor periods by overproducing later. Each period stands on its own. Success accumulates when conditions allow, and pauses when they do not. This approach limits risk. Overextension does not occur. Energy use remains tied closely to return. When limits are reached, activity contracts naturally. The result is persistence without expansion beyond what the environment can support. Bees remain present across a wide range of conditions because they remain constrained by them. Through all of this, individual lives remain brief. Adults emerge, feed, nest, and disappear. Their actions contribute to a pattern that continues beyond any single lifespan. The system persists because it is composed of many short lives rather than long ones. The continuity of bee life does not depend on any one place remaining unchanged. It depends on the repeated availability of flowering plants and nesting spaces somewhere within reach. As long as those elements appear, activity resumes. This repeated resumption is what maintains presence. Not constant activity in one location, but recurring activity across many locations over time. Across this continuing activity, what becomes consistent is how little bees rely on permanence. Structures appear and disappear. Roots form and dissolve. Individuals come and go. The system remains active because it is built to operate under change rather than against it. In places where flowers return year after year, bees often reappear in similar numbers, but not because they remember the place. Conditions simply align again. Nesting spaces reopen. Plants bloom. Activity resumes as if uninterrupted, even though the individuals involved are different. This renewal depends on the separation between development and surface activity. Eggs and larvae progress within protected spaces, while the world outside shifts. When emergence occurs, adults encounter conditions as they are, not as they were. Behavior responds immediately. Weather events illustrate this clearly. A sudden cold period halts flight. Bees remain within nests. When temperatures rise again, activity resumes without recovery behavior. There is no adjustment period beyond the change itself. Extended, unfavorable periods alter outcomes more gradually. Development slows. Fewer nests are completed. Population output declines. When favorable conditions return, output increases again. The system tracks conditions without storing imbalance. This responsiveness extends to interactions with other species. When competitors are abundant, bees shift timing or location. When competitors decline, bees expand use of available flowers. These shifts occur without conflict or exclusion. In diverse environments, this allows many species to operate simultaneously. Overlap is reduced through difference in timing, plant choice, and movement rather than through defense. Coexistence emerges through variation rather than separation. Over longer periods, these patterns integrate into the landscape. Areas that consistently support flowering and nesting become regular centers of activity. Areas that fluctuate support intermittent presence. These roles may reverse as conditions change. Through all of this, bees do not alter the landscape to suit their needs. They do not store resources beyond immediate requirements. They do not maintain territory. Their persistence depends on repeated alignment rather than control. This dependence on alignment makes bee presence subtle. Activity does not accumulate in one place. It flows. Presence shifts. Absence is often temporary. Seen across time, this produces continuity without stability. The system remains intact, even as its components change. Individual losses do not disrupt function. Population fluctuations do not halt activity. The everyday work of bees continues through this movement. Feeding, nesting, development, and emergence repeat wherever conditions permit. Nothing in this process requires direction beyond immediate cues. Across all of this activity, what remains consistent is how bees integrate themselves into existing systems without requiring those systems to remain unchanged. They do not depend on a particular arrangement of plants, paths, or spaces persisting over time. Instead, they respond to whatever configuration exists when they emerge. This responsiveness allows bees to operate in environments that change frequently. A garden planted one year and altered the next still supports bee activity as long as some flowers appear. A field rotated between crops changes which plants are visited, but not the way bees forage. A wild area that burns, floods, or regrows presents different resources at different times, and bees adjust accordingly. Foraging behavior reflects this flexibility. Bees do not search indiscriminately. They sample, assess, and commit briefly. When reward declines, commitment ends. This prevents long-term attachment to resources that no longer support effort. Nesting behavior follows a similar pattern. Sites are selected based on present conditions rather than future certainty. If a site becomes unsuitable, it is abandoned without loss beyond that single reproductive effort. There is no attempt to reinforce or defend a failing location. Across populations, this produces a spread of risk. Some nests succeed, others do not. The population persists because success is distributed rather than concentrated. No single failure propagates through the system. In social species, this distribution occurs through numbers rather than location. Colonies produce many workers. Losses occur continuously. Tasks are absorbed by others without replacement or compensation. Function continues as long as some portion of the group remains active. This tolerance of loss shapes behavior. Bees do not avoid risk entirely. They operate within limits that allow acceptable loss without collapse. Foraging continues despite danger. Nesting proceeds despite uncertainty. The system functions because it does not require perfect success. Over time, these behaviors create a pattern of presence that is diffuse rather than concentrated. Bees appear wherever conditions align briefly. They disappear when they do not. This ebb and flow gives the impression of fragility, but it reflects adaptability. The absence of accumulation is key. Bees do not build infrastructure that must be maintained. They do not rely on stored information across generations. Each cycle begins with available resources and ends when those resources no longer support activity. Because of this, bees remain difficult to track through simple observation. Counts rise and fall. Locations change. Activity shifts seasonally and spatially. Presence is better understood as a pattern over time than as a fixed population. This pattern continues regardless of whether it is observed. Bees operate at scales small enough to go unnoticed and across time short enough to appear intermittent. Their work remains embedded in the everyday functioning of landscapes rather than standing apart from it. The result is a system that persists without drawing attention to itself. Activity remains present as long as flowers bloom and nesting spaces appear somewhere within reach. When those elements shift, activity shifts with them. Across this ongoing movement, the presence of bees becomes less about visibility and more about rhythm. Activity appears and disappears in places not because the system weakens, but because it shifts. What looks like absence often reflects relocation in time rather than loss. In one area, flowering may be brief. Bees arrive, work intensively, and leave. In another area, flowering may be staggered. Activity remains spread out. These differences shape how bees are encountered, but not how they live. The daily rhythm of a bee follows light, temperature, and reward. Morning begins with testing. Flowers are sampled. Nectar concentration is assessed. Routes are adjusted. As the day progresses, activity concentrates where return is highest. Toward evening, movement slows, and attention returns to the nest. This cycle repeats without variation only when conditions allow. Cloud cover shifts it, wind compresses it, heat expands it or restricts it depending on species. The rhythm remains flexible, shaped by conditions rather than habit. Within nests, this external rhythm intersects with internal timing. Larvae require consistent feeding. Temperature must remain stable. Construction and repair continue as needed. These tasks do not follow the day directly, but they respond to its outcomes. In social nests, this intersection produces a layered rhythm. External foraging rises and falls. Internal care continues with fewer fluctuations. The colony remains functional, even when surface activity pauses briefly. Solitary nests follow a different pattern. External activity and internal development are separated by time rather than space. Once the nest is sealed, external conditions matter only insofar as they influence temperature and moisture. Development proceeds without further interaction. Across weeks, this separation allows bees to occupy environments that would otherwise be unreliable. Brief periods of abundance support activity that carries forward into periods of scarcity. The system relies on timing rather than continuity of resources. At larger scales, these rhythms combine. Different species operate at different times of day, different points in the season, and different stages of landscape change. Together, they produce a near-continuous presence, even though no single species remains active throughout. This overlapping activity smooths variability. When one species pauses, another continues. When one area falls silent, another becomes active. Presence is maintained through diversity rather than endurance. Through all of this, bees remain focused on immediate conditions. There is no accumulation of intent. Each adjustment responds to what is present now. Continuity emerges because these responses are effective across a wide range of situations. The work bees do is embedded in this rhythm. Feeding, nesting, development, and emergence align with cycles of availability. Nothing is held beyond what can be used. Nothing is pursued beyond what can be sustained. This alignment allows bee life to persist quietly across environments that change continually. The pattern holds without needing reinforcement. Across this steady rhythm, the everyday work of bees remains grounded in contact. Bodies meet flowers, feet grip surfaces, mouthparts draw liquid, pollen adheres to hair. Each interaction is small and brief, yet repeated countless times across hours and days. The precision of these interactions matters. A bee landing on a flower adjusts position to reach nectar efficiently. Slight changes in posture alter which parts of the body contact pollen. These adjustments are not calculated. They arise from structure and movement refined through repeated use. As flowers vary, so do these contacts. Open flowers invite broad landing. Narrow flowers require careful alignment. Tubular blooms favor bees with longer tongues. Flat blooms suit those that carry pollen across the body. These differences distribute effort across species without requiring separation. Within the same day, a bee may encounter dozens of flower forms. Each encounter is resolved through the same process of approach, contact, and departure. Memory reduces search time, but the interaction itself remains immediate. Nectar quality shifts throughout the day as plants replenish sugars and lose water. Bees respond by revisiting flowers at times when reward is greatest. This timing emerges through repeated experience rather than anticipation. Pollen collection follows similar patterns. Some flowers release pollen early, others release it gradually. Bees adjust, visit frequency accordingly. Where pollen is abundant, collection is rapid. Where it is sparse, effort increases or shifts elsewhere. These micro-decisions scale upward. Individual adjustments accumulate into route changes. Route changes alter which plants are visited more frequently. Over time, these patterns influence plant reproduction without bees acting with that outcome in mind. Nests absorb the results of this work. Food arrives in pulses. Materials accumulate. Development proceeds in response to supply rather than schedule. When intake slows, development slows. When intake increases, activity rises. In social nests, this buffering allows continuity. Fluctuations at the surface are smoothed within the group. In solitary nests, buffering is achieved through timing and construction rather than shared storage. Across both systems, the same principle applies. Immediate conditions shape action. Action shapes outcome. Outcome feeds back into the next action. As days pass, these loops repeat. Nothing accumulates beyond what can be used. Nothing is held for distant future states. The system remains light, responsive, and adaptable. Across landscapes, these repeated loops create presence without permanence. Bees appear where flowers open. They disappear when they close. Nesting continues unseen. Emergence occurs when conditions align again. This pattern does not require stability. It requires recurrence. As long as flowering and nesting opportunities reappear somewhere within reach, bee life continues. Across everything that has been moving and adjusting, bees remain anchored to the same basic requirements. Flowers must appear. Nesting spaces must exist. Temperature must fall within a workable range. When these conditions align, activity resumes. When they do not, activity pauses or shifts elsewhere. What makes this possible is that bees do not rely on any single place to remain suitable. They operate across many small opportunities rather than one stable center. A single flowering patch may support activity for days or weeks. When it fades, attention moves. The nest remains, but roots dissolve and reform. This behavior does not require memory beyond the individual. Each bee learns roots through repetition and abandons them when reward declines. No information is stored beyond what is present in the environment itself. Flowers open or close. Nectar thickens or thins. Conditions signal what to do next. Across seasons, these signals change. Spring brings emergence. Summer brings sustained activity. Late season brings contraction. Development continues within nests as surface movement slows. The system shifts emphasis rather than ending. In regions where flowering is staggered across long periods, bee presence appears continuous. In regions where flowering is brief, presence appears sudden and intense. Both patterns arise from the same underlying processes, responding to different timing. Within social nests, this timing is smoothed by storage and shared effort. Within solitary systems, timing is sharpened by precision and speed. Neither approach dominates. Each persists where it fits. As these patterns repeat year after year, the importance of bees becomes clear without needing to be stated directly. Their activity connects plant reproduction across space. Their nesting integrates soil, stems, and cavities into living cycles. Their movement redistributes pollen and energy through contact rather than intention. Bees do not act as caretakers of landscapes. They do not attempt to maintain balance. They participate. Their presence alters outcomes simply by continuing to live as they are. Without bees, many plants would fail to reproduce reliably. Flowering would still occur, but transfer between plants would become uncertain. Diversity would narrow gradually. Change would move in one direction rather than remaining open. With bees present, variation remains possible. Different plants succeed in different places. Timing matters. Overlap increases. The system remains flexible rather than fixed. What sustains this flexibility is not effort, but repetition. Bees repeat the same actions thousands of times: landing, feeding, leaving, nesting, sealing, emerging. These actions accumulate into large effects without being aimed at them. As attention settles toward the end of this movement, nothing resolves into stillness. Activity continues beyond view. Nests remain sealed. Development proceeds. Roots will form again when flowers return. The work of bees does not conclude. It recurs. It resumes. It remains embedded in the everyday functioning of the world, shaped by conditions rather than directed by them. Across the repeated movement of bees, what endures is not any single action, but the way small actions continue to link living systems together. Flowers open and close. Bees arrive and depart. Contact happens briefly, then ends. Yet these brief moments accumulate into continuity across space and time. The work bees do is not separate from their lives. Feeding, nesting, developing, and emerging are not tasks aimed at outcomes beyond survival and reproduction. They are simply how bee life unfolds. The effects that follow on plants, landscapes, and seasons arise from this persistence rather than from intention. Bees do not move with awareness of scale. They operate within distances their bodies allow and time frames their lifespans contain. What appears as coordination at larger scales emerges from countless individual movements repeated across many places. As one generation ends, another begins without reference to what came before. Nests sealed months earlier open again. Adults emerge into conditions that differ slightly each year. Roots form anew. Flowers are sampled again. The pattern resumes without memory. This renewal keeps systems open rather than settled. No arrangement remains fixed. Plant communities shift. Bee presence adjusts. Activity flows rather than accumulates. Absence is temporary, shaped by timing rather than loss. The environments bees inhabit do not need to be stable. They need only to reappear in workable forms. A patch of flowers, a cavity, bare ground, a hollow stem. These elements need not persist forever. They need only to exist long enough for bee life to pass through them. Because of this, bees remain present across landscapes that are fragmented, seasonal, and continually changing. Their persistence depends on recurrence rather than permanence. As long as conditions return somewhere within reach, activity resumes. The quiet continuity of bee life does not announce itself. It is noticed in passing, in movement between flowers, in brief visits, in the hum of flight that fades as quickly as it appears. Beneath that surface, sealed nests hold development in stillness, waiting for alignment. Nothing here resolves. There is no final balance achieved. The system remains responsive, shaped by conditions rather than directed toward an end. Bees continue because the way they live allows continuation. As attention rests on this movement, the world they inhabit remains active beyond view. Flowers will open again, roots will form again, contact will occur again. The pattern will continue as long as these elements recur. Across this continuing pattern, the importance of bees does not come from rarity or spectacle. It comes from repetition. The same movements occur again and again, across different places, different species, and different moments in time. Each repetition is small. Together they sustain connection. Bees do not specialize in changing the world. They specialize in meeting it where it is. Their bodies are shaped to interact with flowers that exist now. Their timing aligns with seasons as they unfold, rather than as they are expected to. Their nests are built from materials already present, shaped only enough to protect what develops inside. This approach allows bee life to persist through uncertainty. When conditions change, there is no delay caused by adjustment to past patterns. Activity simply shifts. Routes dissolve. New ones form. Nests appear in different places. Presence moves rather than resists. Across years, this movement creates continuity without accumulation. There is no need for memory beyond the individual. No structure must be maintained indefinitely. No single place must remain suitable forever. As long as flowering and shelter appear somewhere, bee life resumes. This is why bees are found in places that seem unlikely, along road edges, in small gardens, in abandoned ground, in narrow gaps between buildings. These spaces are enough, not because they are ideal, but because bee life requires only brief alignment rather than long-term stability. What follows from this way of living is not control, but participation. Bees take part in systems already in motion. They link plants through contact. They move pollen without carrying purpose beyond feeding. They enable reproduction without directing it. Over time, this participation shapes what grows where. It influences which plants persist. It allows variation to continue, rather than narrowing outcomes. The world remains open to change, because the processes connecting it remain flexible. The absence of bees would not produce immediate silence. Flowers would still open. Seeds would still form occasionally. But the reliability of connection would fade. Reproduction would depend more heavily on chance. Diversity would narrow slowly, without a clear moment of loss. With bees present, connection remains frequent. Movement continues. Outcomes remain varied. The system stays responsive rather than fixed. As this observation settles, there is no need to conclude the story of bees. Their lives do not move toward resolution. They repeat. They resume. They continue wherever conditions allow. Across what continues to unfold, the way bees move through the world remains consistent in its simplicity. They do not build systems meant to last beyond their immediate needs. They do not attempt to preserve conditions. They act within what is available, using what exists at the moment it is encountered. This way of living produces a steady flow rather than a fixed arrangement. Activity concentrates where flowers appear, then thins as those flowers fade. Nesting follows feeding success, then ends when the cycle completes. Development continues unseen, insulated from surface change by materials chosen earlier. Because of this separation between visible activity and internal process, bee life often appears intermittent. Periods of quiet alternate with bursts of movement. The absence of flight does not signal absence of life. It signals a shift in stage or timing. Within sealed nests, development proceeds according to temperature and moisture rather than surface conditions. Time passes slowly here. Change is gradual. The environment outside may vary widely, while the interior remains workable. This buffering allows bee life to persist through brief disruptions without altering its course. When emergence occurs, adults encounter the world as it is then, not as it was when the nest was sealed. Roots are learned fresh. Flowers are sampled again. Success depends on present alignment rather than stored expectation. This repeated resetting prevents accumulation of dependency. No generation relies on the same arrangement as the last. Each operates independently, shaped by current conditions. Continuity emerges because these independent cycles overlap across space and time. Across landscapes, this produces a quiet redundancy. Multiple species operate in similar ways but at different times, on different plants, and in different places. When one pathway pauses, another continues. When one area falls quiet, another becomes active. The effect of this redundancy is not amplification, but resilience. Bee life does not concentrate its influence in one place or moment. It spreads it across many small interactions. Each interaction is brief. Together they sustain connection. Bees do not manage these connections. They do not adjust behavior to maintain outcomes. They simply continue to feed, move, nest, and reproduce. The patterns that result follow from repetition rather than intention. The materials bees use reflect this same economy. Mud, leaves, resin, wax, soil, stems. None are altered beyond what is necessary. Structures are temporary, sufficient only for the period they are needed. When their function ends, they are abandoned without maintenance. This refusal to hold on to structure allows rapid response to change. Bees are not burdened by what they built before. They are free to build again where conditions allow. Over longer spans, this produces a landscape marked by traces rather than monuments. Old nests decay, new ones appear, paths of movement shift. The system remains active without accumulating evidence of its activity. What persists is not form, but process. Feeding continues wherever flowers open. Nesting continues wherever shelter appears. Development continues wherever conditions remain tolerable long enough. Because these processes require little permanence, they persist even as environments fragment and rearrange. Bee life does not require large, uninterrupted spaces. It requires small opportunities repeated often. This is why bees remain present across places that change frequently, gardens that are replanted, fields that rotate crops, edges that shift with development. These places are sufficient because bee life fits into brief windows rather than demanding continuity. As this observation continues, there is no moment when activity resolves into stillness. Even when movement fades from view, development proceeds. Even when one cycle ends, another begins elsewhere. The work of bees is therefore never completed. It is renewed each time conditions align. It does not build toward a final state. It maintains openness within living systems by continuing to move through them. As this movement settles, what remains most apparent is how little bee life depends on continuity of place. It depends instead on continuity of opportunity. A flower opening, a cavity appearing, a patch of soil remaining undisturbed for long enough. These moments do not need to last. They only need to occur. Bee life fits into these moments without effort. It arrives, acts, and moves on. Nothing is carried forward except what is sealed into the next stage of development. Nothing is held beyond what can be used. Each cycle completes itself quietly and independently. Because of this, Bee activity leaves few lasting marks. Nests decay, paths of flight disappear, contact ends as soon as it occurs. Yet the process continues because it does not rely on what came before. It relies on what is present now. Across time, this creates a form of persistence that does not depend on stability. Bee life remains present because it is light, responsive, and repeatable. It can pause without failing. It can resume without recovery. It can move without loss. This way of living allows bees to remain part of the world without shaping it into permanence. They do not store excess. They do not defend territory. They do not attempt to secure the future. They continue by meeting each moment as it comes. What appears fragile at the scale of individuals becomes durable at the scale of patterns. Brief lives overlap. Short actions repeat. Presence shifts, but does not disappear. This is how bee life continues, not through accumulation, but through recurrence. Not through control, but through fit. Not through lasting structures, but through ongoing movement. Across the present world, bees continue to live in ways that are shaped by immediate conditions rather than long-term plans. A bee emerges into a landscape that already exists. Flowers may be abundant or scarce. Nesting space may be easy to find or limited. Temperature, light, and wind determine what is possible each day. When flowers are available, bees move between them repeatedly, landing, feeding, and leaving within seconds. Each visit is brief. The same flower may be visited many times in a day by different bees, each one taking only what is available at that moment. Nectar is gathered in small amounts. Pollen clings to hair and is carried away unintentionally. When flowers fade, bees do not remain in place. Activity shifts. Roots shorten or disappear. Attention moves to other plants or pauses entirely. The nest remains, but movement beyond it changes constantly. Inside nests, development continues regardless of surface activity. Larvae consume the food that was gathered earlier. Growth proceeds according to temperature and moisture, rather than time of day or weather outside. A sealed nest holds this process in place, while conditions above it fluctuate. In social species, the same separation exists at a larger scale. Foraging may slow or stop for days when conditions are poor. Inside the nest, care continues. Food is redistributed. Temperature is regulated. When conditions improve, outward movement resumes without delay. In solitary species, this separation is achieved through structure rather than cooperation. The nest itself holds the future. Once sealed, no further action is required. Success depends entirely on the accuracy of earlier decisions about location, depth, and materials. Across landscapes, these individual processes overlap. Some bees are active, while others are developing unseen. Some species are present only briefly each year. Others remain visible for longer periods. Together, they create a pattern of activity that is continuous, even though no single bee or species is always present. This overlapping presence allows plants to reproduce across space and time. Pollen moves between individuals that may never be visited by the same bee twice. Transfer happens through repeated, uncoordinated contact rather than directed effort. Bees do not adjust their behavior to maintain these outcomes. They continue to feed, nest, and reproduce in the same ways, regardless of scale. The effects emerge from repetition rather than intention. Because bee life depends on short-lived opportunities rather than permanent conditions, It remains present in places that change often. A flowering verge, a garden that blooms for part of the year, a patch of bare soil exposed briefly. These spaces are enough. What persists is not structure, but movement. Bees arrive where conditions allow, work briefly, and move on. Development continues where it was set in motion. New adults emerge into whatever conditions exist then. This cycle does not resolve. It continues as long as flowers open and nesting spaces appear. Somewhere, for long enough. Somewhere, flowers will open again. Somewhere, a bee will arrive. Contact will occur briefly, then it will pass. The pattern will remain. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you have enjoyed spending time with the bees.